everybody, I am Joe Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your genealogy and DNA test questions. As always, if you have a question for me that you'd like me to answer in one of these videos, be sure to go to my subreddit r/GenieVlogger and post your questions there. I have a lot of questions dating real far back, over a year at this point, almost over 200, if not more than 200, and it's a lot. So be sure to post your questions because it takes me a while to get to them, but I'm hoping to speed it up. But let's jump into the first question. My Ancestry DNA results. England and Northwestern Europe, 52%, 41 region I have no connection to. I'm not quite sure. This is a little confusing. All right, we're going to try to understand this. England and Northwestern Europe, 52%, 41 region I have no connection to. Sweden and Denmark, 22%. Region I have no connection to. Germanic Europe, 21, and region no connection to. All right, so what I think they're saying is that they have 52% England and Northwestern Europe, and then they're getting 41 regions within that. But I don't know. I'm guessing maybe this English isn't their first language, or they just typed really quickly because I'm not fully understanding what they're asking. If my results are saying I have DNA tracks to these geographic region, why don't I have any traces to other 41 regions in England and Northwestern Europe? Has this occurred to anyone else? Okay, so for one, we don't know where they're testing. My Ancestry DNA results, maybe they're testing on Ancestry. I guess maybe the question here is why are there 41 regions that they have no connection to? So I guess maybe that's why they're saying, 41 regions. So, and that's where they're getting it from. But if that is the question, then the answer is real simple in the fact that just because you're getting a reading of England and Northwestern Europe, it doesn't mean that you're connected to every single region within England and Northwestern Europe. And that's kind of the point of having the region breakdowns within the certain percentages to help give a better idea, because the regions they give you are often based more off of the family trees of your genetic matches than just the genetic match admixtures. So I think that's what the question is. Kind of confusing here. Hopefully that answers it, but let's jump into the next question. Maternal DNA curveball. A lot of my family did the Ancestry DNA test. We didn't do this until after my dad passed away, but my aunt on my dad's side has been tested. Mom is still living, but had a bone marrow transplant 15 plus years ago. She tried to do it and got 0 results from it. Okay. We thought maybe it would mix hers and her donor's DNA to show her a bunch of people she wouldn't actually be related to. Mom's mother did the test, so we did at least have that. Mom's father passed long ago and was an only child. The story is his grandparents came from Germany and changed the spelling of their name, Newman to Newman. This would possibly work out correctly since I'm 3% red-haired, blue-eyed, light-freckled skin German. So poster, I match up well with my brother. He didn't seem to get the German DNA. So let's see. Okay, so we see Germanic 3%, and then a whole mixture of the typical Northwestern, Central Europe sort of, because, you're including Sweden and Denmark and Germanic Europe, but a lot of that correlates. So 3% could just be, misread or something. Although you do have known German ancestry, so it could be, yeah. All right, me and brother, this one is of my aunt, dad, sister. Wait, oh, okay, me. Okay, I'm reading these backwards. So here's you and your brother. And so brother's not getting Germanic Europe, but I mean, it makes sense, you're both getting basically the same stuff except for the Germanic Europe, but that's also your lowest percentage. Then the last one, or not the last one, but one of them, this is one of my aunt, dad's sister. Looks like there's some German on my dad's side also. So the German is coming from your mom's father. The story of how my surname got here is 2 brothers arrived from Ireland after their parents had passed. I don't know if that is accurate since she has no Irish in her. I have researched the family tree. It seems to stop at the 2 brothers from Ireland. I never find anything in Ireland to trace it there. All right, so looking at poster and the aunt, we see Germanic Europe, but it's a 2%, so it's trace, meaning that it's low confidence, not that it's a false positive, just the low confidence that it could be true. And then we see a lot of the same stuff except for the Irish, but honestly, with Northwestern European, even if you do have Irish ancestry, it might be possible that you don't get any actual Irish readings. It might be a little surprising not to get any. back here, the last one, this one is my maternal grandmother. Out of all of us, she seems to have more German. The maternal grandfather is the one that had the grandparents move here and change their names. So this is the mom's mother. And so, yeah, Germanic Europe, 8%, which is certainly a bit higher, but once again, we're kind of still dealing with that Northwestern European, Central European mixture. Someone said there is a test out there that will separate the X DNA from the Y DNA. Is there such a thing? And if so, who does it? Also, is there any test out there my mom can take that will show her results since she has had the bone marrow transplant? I really enjoy the content on your channel. Keep the videos coming. Thank you. Okay, so to your question, someone said there is a test out there that separates X DNA from the Y DNA, and yes, that is correct. Family Tree DNA does that. MyHeritage do that? I feel like they do. I think MyHeritage, I can't remember if it's MyHeritage or 23andMe that does that. Let's take a look. Okay, so I just double checked a few things. Family Tree DNA does have X chromosome matching. 23andMe does test the X chromosome, but it didn't have a way where you could just search for your matches that have X chromosomes unless I missed it. And if that's the case, comment below, let me know if there is a way to do that, but I couldn't find it. But other than that, Ancestry, I don't believe has any sort of X chromosome stuff. MyHeritage does not have any X chromosome stuff. And then GEDmatch, which if you do upload to them, they do have X chromosome matching, although I'd have to double check to see if all of the companies include X chromosome DNA in their raw data, even if they don't test for it. So basically like Ancestry and MyHeritage, even though they don't show any X chromosome DNA, they might test for it and they just don't show results in their data for it. But I'm not 100% sure. So there are ways to look at X chromosome DNA, which is very useful because you do have that inheritance pattern, which helps you understand if you're sharing a significant amount of DNA on your X chromosome with someone, you have to be related through an X chromosome related path. You couldn't be related through your father's father because you're not inheriting any X chromosome DNA from your father's father. And then also, is there a way that your mom can test where it will show results? And I honestly don't think there is. For a lot of people watching, you may not know that when you get a bone marrow transplant, it kind of changes a lot of the DNA in your body. And most specifically, it's going to change the DNA cells that we're testing for these tests. So I think there's actually clauses in the DNA terms of service. You may need to look into that too, where if you are doing DNA testing with it, they specifically say not to do bone marrow transplant stuff. Or if you've done a bone marrow transplant. Actually, you know what? I'm going to double check and see if that's the case. So here we have a page from 23andMe where they're specifically talking about bone marrow transplants, and we can see that, pretty straightforward that, they're going to have issues being able to determine, is this your DNA? Is this the donor's DNA? And, it's really uncertain. And then also, when it comes to this, the fact that you're doing a bone marrow transplant and then doing a DNA test, there is a real ethical issue with this in the terms of the person who's the donor of the bone marrow. Unless they're giving you specific permission to try and do a DNA test, it's technically an invasion of their privacy, because while they donated the bone marrow to help you survive and live, they didn't necessarily donate you the privacy permissions to access their DNA and all of that sort of stuff and what comes with it. So there's a serious ethical guideline. And as you can see here with 23andMe, if you've done a bone marrow transplant and used their services, contact customer service because they'll be happy to refund your purchase and close your profile, because there is that ethical guideline. And I'm sure all of these companies have guidelines like this that, they don't want to deal with that problem, because if you do the DNA test and you pop up as a DNA match to your donor's relatives, that's going to throw them off and it's going to cause a lot of issues. And it's just not something these companies want to deal with. So unfortunately, I don't think your mom's going to be able to get tested. But if she has siblings, or if, you might have cousins maybe through her father's side and her mother, well, you already have your mom's mom tested, but if you have cousins through your mother's father's side, maybe getting them to test can at least help you to cover that side of the family in these DNA tests. But I would not suggest having your mom DNA test, unfortunately. On to the next one. Update to Where Is My French? Not quite sure if this is an update to a question I've already answered in the past, or if this is there's been, there has been a bunch of updates in the Ancestry algorithm. So are you asking, did your French leave? So I guess let's take a look and see. So, all right, communities, French settlers, 2 possible ancestors. So we have all this French, a lot of southwestern Quebec, Vermont, Massachusetts, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. So we have a lot of basically French Canadian settlers here. Then go back, let's see the next image. And so, okay, yeah, Ireland 59%, Scotland 27%, England, Northwestern Europe 14%. No French. So let's see, is the third image have French? No. Okay, and then here we have part of 23andMe. Is this 23andMe or MyHeritage? Which one is this? Oh, she even says, I've added my 23andMe results also and had a response to my Ancestry breakdown. So there is a bit more. There's not a whole lot here. So Northwestern Europe, British and Irish, and then connected to County Cork, Ireland, and then Southern European, Spanish, Portuguese, and Sardinian. I'm not quite sure what's going on, why you wouldn't necessarily be getting French. Now, I'm assuming that your question is, why did you not get French? If this is a question that comes off of a previous question I answered at some point, I'm sorry, there's no way I'm going to be able to go back through all those questions I've already answered and try to figure that out. If you're asking, why is the French not there? I think it could be a few things. For one, even if you do descend from these French Canadian settlers, although you did have a lot of communities connected to that, but even if you do connect to these communities, you may not inherit any French readings necessarily, depending on how far back that community is from you and how much was that community actually French. Because I know in my research of a lot of the different French Canadian communities and communities that were, there were a lot of French settlers. There were also Scottish settlers, English settlers, and other types of settlers from all over, Europe that settled in these communities as well. And maybe you actually descend from a lot more of the non-French settlers who were part of those communities, but they weren't really French. And so you're just not really even inheriting any French. Even if you do have some French ancestors from those communities, maybe you're just mostly descending from the English side of that community, but it still was a French Canadian community. So I hope that answers the question, but I'm just, I'm not 100% sure. Let me just double check. Yeah, I don't see any other questions, so hopefully that answers it for you. Let's jump to the next question. I have doubts about my results. A while ago, I took a DNA test from the Family Tree DNA company, and the results came back last week. I was very surprised to see that it said 23% Greece and Balkans because I don't have any ancestors from that area. I have my entire family tree down to my great-grandparents, and none of my ancestors I could connect to that region. My question is, does it have an explanation? Did I get scammed? I also got 4% Anatolian and less than 2% Maltese. I mention this because being close regions, it might help. Another fact that could be relevant is that the 23% of Greece and Balkan is my highest percentage since the others do not exceed 17%. For example, my 14% of Basque, which is partly to be expected since almost all of my father's family has Basque surnames. So this question is going to be a tough one to answer because there's not a whole lot of information that OP's giving us. Unfortunately, I wish they gave us the full percentages breakdown because that gives us an idea. I did look in the comments to see if they could give more information about their background. It seems like they are mostly they're from South America. They were expecting 50% South American, and then the rest to be mostly Iberian with maybe some North African because they knew about the connections between the Moors. And then in another part, they do kind of give a bit more of a breakdown because they start to mention that they uploaded from 23andMe to MyHeritage and did a little comparison of that. So looking at the page, I'm going to show that. So they mention here they upload and then they have some changes with it. So the less than 2% Maltese on 23andMe became 4% Italian on MyHeritage. The less than 2% Sephardic Jewish became 1.3% Ashkenazi Jewish. 16% Central American Native was 17% Andean Native and became, 16% Central American Native and 17% Andean Native became and merged into 63% Mesoamerican and Andean. And then they also mention others disappeared, such as a 10% England did not appear. And then they're asking, which one's more reliable, because apparently MyHeritage didn't even have the 23% Greeks and Balkans. Again, we're dealing with the problem of not enough information from our poster because we need to have the full picture to really tell you what's going on and get a better idea. It's almost like redacted information, like whenever you see those files from the FBI where like a whole bunch of information's redacted and you have to kind of read between the lines. That's what this feels like. But in all honesty, I think what we're dealing with here is kind of a mixture of things. For one, we're dealing with the issue of differences in reading these tests. So in terms of their question of which one's better, I always like to say I don't really see any of these better in terms of the admixtures, because mostly the admixtures are the least genealogically relevant part of these DNA tests, and you could go on for years and years guessing what it means and reading it like reading a zodiac sign and come up with all these conclusions of it could be this, it could be that. But until you do the actual genetic genealogy research and confirm it through the paper trail and DNA matches, you're only going to be guessing. So, trying to read these zodiac signs of the different percentages from each different website, I think it's kind of a losing game because you're spending all of this brain power and time trying to interpret something that you're never going to know until you do the actual research. I don't know which one's necessarily better. I do certainly think it's interesting that MyHeritage is giving you a much bigger amount of Native Americans, 63%, versus the about 35%, 36% that you're getting through 23andMe. But then again, we also don't know all the percentages, so it could be that it's being read as something else. As well, you mentioned that Italian being in there, but the less than 2% Maltese it's not equating for all the 4% Italian. And a lot of Greek and Balkan DNA has links to Italy through the Mediterranean. So a lot of that Greek and Balkan could also be Italian. And when you do another test, you might end up not getting any of that. You might end up getting more of a general reading of Southern European, and a lot of it makes sense. So, it's really hard to really get a good idea in terms of what is going on. At least that is until you actually do the genealogy research to see what's going on. Now, you do mention here, I have my entire family tree down to my great-grandparents, but that's not a lot. If you have your entire family tree down to your great-grandparents, what do you have beyond that? Because if you only have your great-grandparents, then you don't necessarily know what their true ancestry might be. And at 23% Greek and Balkan, assuming that there might be some, relative changing for things, it could be a grandparent or it could be a great-grandparent, assuming it's coming from one ancestor, then it could be that maybe you have two great-grandparents that you don't know any of their ancestry beyond South America, but really their parents might have moved there from Italy or Greece or the Balkans or somewhere else kind of in those areas where they share a lot of DNA, basically that Southern European Mediterranean area. So having it traced to your great-grandparents is great because it certainly gives you a great idea of, okay, if this is 23% and coming from a grandparent or a great-grandparent or two great-grandparents, then at the very least, you should have them within your tree, but you still may not be able to identify them because maybe the surname was changed, maybe the information you have is not quite there, or, people just, sometimes up and leave and just create whole new lives, and maybe that was the case for one of your great-grandparents. Hopefully that answered your question, but let's jump to the next one. How accurate is Wikitree? I've been doing some research on Wikitree and I'm wondering how accurate the relationship finder is. It seems like most of my oldest ancestors come from known royalty. Is it really the case, or is someone having some fun in there? Charlemagne, Queen Victoria, some Viking Jarl, William Wallace's niece, a Russian prince, and a bunch of others. I'm starting to have doubts over this, although it does fit with my DNA profile. What do you guys think? Now, this is a really interesting question because this is a question I will hear all the time about how accurate is Wikitree? How accurate is Genie? How accurate is MyHeritage? How accurate are the trees on Ancestry? How accurate is GenieNet? And the thing is that it varies, even for these collaborative trees like Wikitree, Genie, and Family Search. Now, a lot of times Wikitree, Genie, and Family Search really get lumped into these questions of how accurate are they in sense of the fact that they're collaborative. So for one, it's only one tree. It's not like Ancestry where you go and you see all these trees made by people, and it's much more straightforward that this is that person's tree and whatever's wrong in there is because that person got it wrong. Whereas when it comes to Genie, it's almost, or Genie, Wikitree, whatever, it's almost like Wikipedia in the sense that, you know, people go on Wikipedia and they say, oh, all the information on Wikipedia is wrong and this and that. And really, it's not that simple. It varies by article and it depends on the source citations they have. And you have to actually check to see, is it correct? But it's a great jumping off point, I guess a lot of people say. Although, if you've ever watched JJ McCullough's video on the topic, he's not quite of the same agreement. But the truth is with how accurate is Wikitree in terms of the relationship finder is it depends on the line and who put it in. And you can check it. Now, I haven't really used Wikitree's relationship finder quite as much as I've used Genie's, but I assume that they're pretty similar. They show you the relationship path between you and then someone else within Wikitree. And when it comes to famous people in royal trees, a lot of people will find connections to that. And once you find one connection into the royal tree, you will then find a connection to every other person who is connected into the royal tree, because the royal tree and even the separate royal trees of the different royal families, they all connect, whether it's through marriages or through actual bloodlines. All of these families connect, and because they were royals, they were well traced for many, many years. So anyone going on Genie, Wikitree, Family Search, or whatever, when you link into the world tree or their one tree, their large tree, you will instantly be able to find out how you're connected to all of the people, you know, the people who you list and even more. So as an example, I did this on my series Tracing the Family Tree for Mr. Beat, and I've done it for a lot of the other YouTubers, where I go in and I see how are they related. So for Mr. Beat, I actually saw how he was related to all the other guests on my YouTuber Family Tree series, as well as his top 10 favorite presidents and his top 5 favorite historical personalities. But there is still a question as to the veracity of each link. And to be able to confirm that, you just have to go and look at the link and then confirm generation by generation with the paper trail and or DNA. Now, once you start getting real far back, the DNA really is not quite as helpful unless you're doing specifically Y-DNA testing or mitochondrial DNA testing. And when I say that, I'm not talking about just a general haplogroup like what you get through 23andMe. I'm talking about actual full-on testing like what you do through Family Tree DNA, or what you do through a whole genome sequencing company like Nebula. But one of the nice things about Wikitree, and this is the thing that really sets them apart from all the other family tree softwares, and especially the other collaborative softwares, is their site is designed that if you're putting information in their tree, you better have something sourced to put it in there. They do have a team of people that volunteer. They're all a lot of great people. I actually hung out and, you know, saw a bunch of them when I was at RootsTech. And, you know, a lot of them are really amazing genealogists. But when you go onto Wikitree and you try to add something, if you don't have any source citations, it's going to be very difficult to add it in. And they make it purposely that way so that things are much easier to verify. So when you are doing the relationship finder through Wikitree, they make it much easier to verify just by clicking through the profiles. Start with your profile, then go to your parents and so on, and go through each generation. You can look at what's attached to the profile that confirms the link between that person and their parents, and then that person and their parents, until you get to the point of, okay, this is the sibling or the whoever to your great whatever, or you specifically descend from that famous person. So the basic answer is maybe. And then in terms of the question of how accurate is Wikitree, it just depends on what part of the tree you're looking at, how well sourced it is, and how well built up it is, because it's just a part of the tree that was built by somebody. And the beautiful thing of these collaborative trees is that if you do find something that's incorrect, then you can go and you can get it corrected. Now, while this question was about Wikitree, personally, my favorite collaborative family tree is Genie. Part of it having to do with I've been on it for the longest time, and it's much more intuitive to me. It's much easier to browse and navigate and do all the things I like to do. And I also like a lot about it. But if you'd like to learn more about the history of it, which is quite interesting, be sure to check out this video of mine detailing that. Thank you to my YouTube members and Patreon patrons.